Hello, my name is Andrew Geary, and welcome to Seismic Sound Off in-depth conversations in applied geophysics. In this episode, I speak with Steve Sloan, Special Section Coordinator for September's The Leading Edge Exploring Smart City Geophysics. Steve highlights the wide array of papers highlighting the tools and techniques used to achieve the best results in less than ideal environments. We discuss the importance of geophysics in urban settings, how geophysics is uniquely suited to work in these environments, and the benefits afforded geophysicists even in high-noise surroundings. We also discuss the role of privacy in obtaining data in urban settings. This is a great primer on the near surface and its value in major population areas. Steve Sloan is a research geophysicist at the U.S. Army Engineer Research and Development Center in the Geotechnical and Structures Laboratory. He currently serves as the past chair of the SEG Near Service Technical Section and is a member of the SEG Council and the editorial board of The Leading Edge. For the full show notes and links to the papers, visit seg.org/podcast. Now for our conversation. So thanks for joining me today, Steve. We're looking at the September The Leading Edge special section today, and what stood out to you from the papers highlighting smart city geophysics?
Well, I think it really shows the wide range of applications and novel studies that are being worked on out there by different researchers and different research groups. There's kind of two sides to the city part. You've got, I think, your conventional applications in urban environments, as well as looking at more of the smart city part of, how do you use sensors and information to things to help drive decision making. And so it's kind of an interesting dynamic there, definitely with some overlap between the two. But being in an urban environment, you've got a lot of unique challenges. So fighting the noise versus using the noise to your advantage, different methods of data acquisition and instrumentation, things like that. So it's just been interesting to see the wide range of things that folks are working on out there.
Yeah, and speaking of those challenges of noise in an urban setting, I imagine for a lot of geophysicists that just feels like a worst case scenario to have to do something like that. Are there actual advantages? You mentioned there are. What are some of those advantages to working in an urban setting for a geophysicist?
Well, it's definitely challenging. I mean, you think of an urban environment, you've got all kinds of different noise sources, from air traffic to vehicles, pedestrians moving, industrial work going on, electrical noises, kind of you name it, and it's out there. But on the same hand, there are lots of sources out there. So from like a passive seismic perspective, there's a lot of energy that's being generated. It's a little more complicated since you got it coming from all different directions, and there's a lot of it coming at once. But there's lots of different types with different frequencies. So a lot of things that you can take advantage there from a passive perspective. And then when you look at some of the newer stuff that's been coming out in the last decade or so, like the distributed acoustic seismic, you think of an urban environment and there's fiber optic cable everywhere now. So really you have a city that's already networked up in terms of seismic sensors. So it's a matter of figuring out how you can tap into them and use it.
What is important generally about the use of geophysics in these urban settings?
Well, I think one of the big ones is urban environments are population centers. So, it's where you have a whole lot of people living and working all in the same space there. You got lots of subsurface infrastructure, whether it's utilities or transportation. A lot of times they're constrained in terms of amount of land to be able to sprawl out. So things go up often instead of out. Being able to understand and identify geohazards like earthquakes, landslides, or tsunamis, or resource management such as groundwater or geothermal. I think you got cities in lots of different environments, whether it's in the mountains or in deserts, cold environments, hot environments, on the coast. So there's some unique different challenges associated with each one, and lots of different geophysical tools that can kind of play into them.
Yeah, and speaking of those tools, what makes geophysics particularly well suited to the challenges of urban city development?
Well, the different methods have pros and cons associated with them, just in general, but certainly with their urban environments as well. But for the most part, they're non-destructive, especially airborne or surface-based measurements. So you don't have to get into the ground to use them. In an urban environment, in particular, especially with new construction and new utilities going in all the time, you've got the potential to build in sensor networks, whether it's taking advantage of those fiber optic cables or starting to instrument your bridges or your buildings or some of your infrastructure there. And the infrastructure is already in place there to be able to pass that information in terms of a lot of the subterranean conduits and utility corridors that you can run a lot of this through. One of the things that I think you're seeing more and more in some of the publications is you got lots of people, which means you got lots of smartphones these days and lots of potential for possible sensors and interactions there to take advantage of.
And let's look at some of the papers in this special section. What advantages did McComas et al. Discover when they themselves took advantage of techniques developed by the nuclear monitoring community for case studies within these urban settings?
Yeah, that was an interesting paper. So, infrasound, I think historically has been mostly used to monitor nuclear blasts and nuclear testing by different countries around the world. It's sub 20 hertz energy, and here they're moving from these arrays that are typically laid out in quiet rural areas to putting them out in urban environments and trying to figure out how to deal with all those different noise sources that we talked about a minute ago, but putting sensor arrays out that can go on rooftops or in some cases blending in with the surrounding infrastructure or in parks and things like that. And so they're developing some novel methods to monitor and assess infrastructure like bridges and dams without necessarily having to be out in the rural environments.
How can future geophysical surveys take into account some of the lessons and conclusions from Dean and Al Hassani?
Well, I think it's just assumed that if you're working in an urban environment, you're going to have higher levels of noise, and there's no way of getting around that completely. So there's going to be some level of it that comes with your data. But I think what they pointed out is that if you understand those sources, where they're coming from, when they're coming in, so what times of the day are different types more prevalent than others, then you can start to take that into consideration for your survey design and your acquisition plan so that you can optimize the way that you're collecting data and try and avoid some of those more problematic types for the type of survey that you're trying to get done.
Yeah, and in Yan et al., we were talking about eliminating noise, reducing noise. Well, in Juan et al.'s paper, they took advantage of the noise. So, what was their novel approach in this paper?
Yeah, that one was another interesting one. They were using Rayleigh waves or surface waves that are generated by nearby vehicles and combining that with local earthquake signals being produced and to generate 2D shear wave velocity profiles and been able to figure out Poisson's ratio, both which are used more on the engineering geophysics side. But what was interesting is they were able to do that without having to cross correlate these really long noise recordings. So ultimately, it simplifies the processing and streamlines it a little bit. And their results ended up comparing favorably with an active source survey, whereas they were using DAS or distributed acoustic sensing. So they were taking advantage of having those fiber optic cables already in place in the ground as well.
And this was a new one in all my readings of the special sections of looking at consumer privacy being a focus. So, why were the authors in Jacopudi et al. Concerned about privacy in their particular study?
Yeah, that one was different. And it really came from a different perspective that I hadn't thought about before. But as these technologies improve, you really broaden the range of applications that they can be used for, and Resolutions are getting better. And then when you think about being able to combine different types of data, so if you're combining passive seismic with, say, a network of surveillance cameras in the city, and you can start tying those things together and putting together patterns of life and what different groups of people are doing, or different neighborhoods, or there's a lot of different things that could come out of that. I know for me personally, I really wouldn't think about that until somebody pointed it out. But I guess with all things developed with the best intentions, but some folks can always find bad things to do with it too. So it's interesting to see that they're looking at it from that perspective, and trying to figure out how to be able to alleviate the public's concern about how data may be used and who it might be accessed by.
Yeah, I was a little confused in that paper of how even just tracking footsteps was such a giveaway of privacy. But what do you view as some of the helpful trade-offs in this thought process of between consumer privacy and obtaining useful geophysical data for infrastructure and seismic monitoring?
That's a tough one, and I'm sure that one's fraught with political landmines and all kinds of other stuff that I may not be the best one to answer. But I think one thing you can take away from that paper is, even though they were removing some of the data to mask that, or to mute out those things, is you still have useful data, especially in that type of environment where you do have lots of noise sources, and you do, in a passive sense, you just have these huge data volumes. There's still going to be plenty of usable stuff out there, even if you do end up having to pull pieces and parts out of it to be able to mask those things.
Yeah, that's a good note there. How do you see the techniques and case studies and the tools presented across these papers improving the industry?
Well, I think it opens up new uses and methodologies that can really span different disciplines. Think like structural engineering and civil engineering, hydrology, geothermal, geohazards, just to name a handful there. But there's a lot of different disciplines there that can work together and that can benefit from these different types of information. Thinking about how, especially more from a smart city aspect here, but how do you instrument up dams or bridges or buildings or things like that, from a pre-warning perspective for, say, earthquakes or tsunamis, or looking at failure potential for dams or levees, things like that. So I don't know. With me coming from the near surface side of things, I don't know if I see necessarily the immediate things for industry as far as oil and gas exploration, but I think there's definitely a lot of things out there that are beneficial to the civil and the near surface side of things.
Well, I want to close with a couple general questions, as you've been in the industry a while. And if you could just offer one piece of advice for someone looking to succeed in near surface specifically, what would it be?
Hmm. I think the big one is being flexible and somewhat dynamic. I think it's easy to get stovepiped and get really specialized in some things. And I know for me personally, I've worked on in very similar stuff for the last 10 years or so, and it's easy for me to get my blinders on and not pay attention to a lot of the other stuff going on, and keep up with what the new trends are and what folks are working on. But being able to be flexible and continue to learn new things, I think, would be probably the most important one.
And lastly, if you could solve just one mystery as a scientist, what would you hope to solve?
Ah, which comes first, the chicken or the egg?
That's a good one.
I'm sure my son would love to know the answer to that one too.
Well, maybe you can solve it together in the future. Is there anything that I should have asked you that I did not?
Nothing I can think of. You know, I'll say that I think what some of the different papers in here show is that there's really is a lot of interesting work that's being done out there. So it's kind of cool to see the different ideas and applications that folks are coming up with, and the different perspectives that they're coming from. So it's just neat to see the kind of work that people are doing, that things I would never think of myself.
Yeah, this was a unique special section and just focusing on cities, but also the near surface aspect. It was some novel articles for sure that I think a lot of people will find interesting. So thank you for highlighting those with us today and working on this special section.
All right. Well, thank you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you for listening to SEG's flagship podcast, Seismic Sound Off. SEG produces these episodes to benefit its members, the geophysics community, and inform the public on the value of the science. To show your support for the show, please share this episode with a friend, colleague, or manager that would enjoy hearing this show. Your recommendation is the single best action you can take on behalf of SEG's podcast. Go to the website at seg.org/podcast to find all the episodes and learn how you can subscribe for free directly on your phone. Original music by Zach Bridges. This episode was hosted, edited, and produced by Andrew Geary at 51 Features. The SEG podcast team is Ted Bakamjian, Jennifer Crockett, Allie McGinnis, and Mick Sweeney. Thank you for listening. This is Seismic Sound Off, signaling off.